Hi, it's Charles Cameron here, and I'm delighted to welcome Nick Tindley as we have a discussion around some recent amendments to the RCSA template contract for casual on-hire employment. Nick, of course, is a partner with FCB, and FCB not only provide the workforce info line service for RCSA corporate members, but Nick has worked with me for many years as we've navigated and explored the increasingly, dynamic world of on-hire casual employment. Welcome, Nick, and thank you for joining us for a quick cook's tour, as we might call it, as it relates to the amendments of the employment contract for on-hire casual.
Thank you for having me, Charles.
So just a quick reminder to everybody that this template is just that, it's a model. We would recommend that you engage with FCB or your own legal advisors, internal or otherwise, to make sure that it is fit for purpose for your organisation. But this particular template has been in existence for a number of years and has stood the test of time so far. So Nick, very important to understand that an on-hire casual employment contract is one that does require not only a signing, but of course it is always good to actually ensure that your onboarding provisions, the way in which you represent an on-hire casual relationship to a new employee or even to an employee that is being reassigned, is consistent with the contract. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Charles. Everything needs to support the nature of the engagement, because everything comes into play when you get to a court, and of course deciding what the true nature of the employment relationship is.
Great. So before we go into a couple of the new amendments, I think it might be good just to reflect upon clause 2.1, which defines what being employed as a casual on-hire employee actually means. And I don't propose to go through all of it, but some of the key points that I think go to managing, hopefully minimising the risk of what we might call misclassification, where of course a regular ongoing casual employee could be deemed or determined by a federal court or any court to be something other than a casual employee. And the first one is 2.1b, and it states that yes, you'll receive a casual loading as specified in the summary of assignment conditions, the SAC. The SAC is essentially a schedule or an appendix to this contract, and it details a lot of information around the actual casual loading and pay rates and otherwise. Is it important for anybody using this template contract, Nick, to complete the summary of assignment conditions rather than just getting them to sign the agreement and then just give them verbal directions?
Charles, I think it is, because you will see in Rossato that all of the head contract, what we call the head contract, and all of the summaries of assignment conditions were part of the overall reasoning. And there's a couple of points to make on it. One is that the assignment conditions really highlight that the engagement's on an assignment by assignment basis, and at the end of the assignment, that assignment ends, employment might continue, but there may not be any work performed in accordance with that employment. It's also really critical that where you do have a statement of assignment conditions or summary of assignment conditions, you've got a level of consistency between the terms of the contract and the terms of the assignment conditions, and particularly that those assignment conditions don't undermine the way that the contract structured to identify it as casual employment. So you don't want to have fixed requirements around hours in the assignment conditions that go against a really broad kind of structure within the contract itself.
Great. So the SAC, for those using this template, cover things such as the position title on the assignment, who the client is, the assignment commencement date. It certainly, of course, won't detail an assignment end date. It won't commit to regularity of hours. It's certainly no firm advance commitment to hours, Nick. Very important to obviously avoid over-promising in this new world. Is that right?
That's exactly it. I think that's out of the Skene and Rossato decisions, they're probably the three words that resonate most, and what most of your processes and structures avoiding deemed permanency should revolve around.
Great. So some of the other things that jump out at me, going back to 2.1 of the principal provisions of the contract, we do not guarantee or commit to offer you any assignment or to do so with any particular frequency or regularity or on any particular term. So again, I'm assuming that reinforces, I guess, what those on the full bench of the federal court actually were looking for. It's one thing to sign a contract, it's obviously another thing to ensure that the practice is consistent with that, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Charlie, that probably equally important is 2.1F, which is about the employee's right to refuse, because that's a really critical part. You will see in Rossato that the employee was under obligations to perform work once an assignment had been accepted, and so this really steps it away from that sort of situation where, you know, a court could not conclude that there was any kind of penalty or problem for the employee if they did choose to elect their usual casual right to refuse work.
So again, although you might have this provision in the contract, you need to practice what is in the contract, and that is that the individual, the employee, has the right to not be available for work, as of course you as the employer have the right to say, well, look, we don't have work available on this particular date. And the more you move away from that, probably the higher the risk, of course, of a misclassification being proven in a court under this post WorkPac and Rossato world. It also states that 2.1G, you're entitled to accept or reject hours offered to you under an assignment. So again, that goes to that same principle, Nick. And then 2.1J, you have no right to ongoing employment or the continued engagement on a particular assignment. So one of the things we would like to see here is that you look to incorporate those principles, not only in terms of the onboarding and the way in which your consultants, branch managers and others represent this type of work to employees. So again, you would probably want to look to have a standard script, so it's not left up to the interpretation of especially a relatively junior consultant. But the other one I would say, Nick, is to ensure that the, I guess, that relationship you have with the on-hire employee is also reflected where possible in client service agreements, so that it's consistent with the expectations and the contractual provisions with the client. Is that important?
Yeah, indeed. It's getting the whole relationship right.
Right. And of course, we understand that is not always desirable. It is often desirable to have a position where you assign an employee and they, of course, continue on over a long period of time without a lot of management, and certainly employees, we understand, want that consistency of hours, but unfortunately the decision of WorkPac and Rossato really says we'll be very careful about meeting the expectations of the employees. That's the great paradox, I think, of this particular decision. We're now going to go to 4.1. So 4.1, hours of work, is a subclause that, of course, you have amended most recently, having reviewed the impact of the WorkPac and Rossato decision. So it essentially goes to the hours of work which will be offered. Do you want to just provide a very quick summary of the change there and why the change and what it might mean from a practical point of view, Nick?
Yeah, so Charles, I'd label it an abundant caution change. We grappled a little bit with whether the clause needed to be changed, but we thought that providing the small number of changes that we did really reinforced that concept of the ability offer and acceptance of hours. So we've removed the word ordinary. That's probably the most abundant caution thing that we did, to say, well, there's no such thing as ordinary hours. You're on an as-need basis. But then we've talked about, rather than hours being set by the client, because one of the challenges for WorkPac in the Rossato matter was that they had the hours were as per the roster structure of the client. So they would be, we've changed that to be the hours offered to you by us or the client, and which you agree to work. So it's really reinforcing that offer and acceptance.
Okay, so it doesn't require a whole heap of what we call significant change. It just simply goes again to that theme, which is all about we won't overcommit to you, you don't need to overcommit to us, and we need to respect the fact that there is variability. There is no such thing as ordinary or reliable hours, because in fact that's what causes the problems around misclassification.
Yeah, and I think the only thing, one of the reasons we grappled with the change itself is that it's another area where we've got nervousness, I guess, about the consistency between the contract and the practice, and so yeah, that's one of the reasons. But we thought it was significant enough to include, and what we're hoping is that members will flow that through to the way that hours are structured for on-hire employees.
Great, thank you for that. Clause 5.6 under remuneration, it's not an amendment to the template contract, Nick, but it is what we describe as a set-off clause that talks to the fact that where you, of course, are paid over and above the award, or if there are any other entitlements such as casual loadings, in the event you're found not to be casual, or that you have potentially been found to underpaid, then you can use the overpayment of the casual loading, so to speak, or other entitlements, and set those off against that overpayment. So again, just reinforcing that, although, as I understand it, Nick, the Workpac and Rossato decision called into question the capacity of a set-off clause to get you out of jail free, so to speak. This type of clause remains very important still, because if we do end up seeing a change to legislation in the future, it's probably still going to rely upon a well-crafted set-off clause, is it not?
Yeah, and setting aside the major problems with set-off clauses that Rossato identified, which is the NES entitlements and your ability to contract out of some of them, it can be useful because, as we know, in some awards there's significant differences in entitlements between casual and part-time employees, and so you might be able to you can still use this clause. For example, if there are different, weekly, daily, start finish time sort of hours between them, you can still kind of rely on the set off clause to give you the advantage and to offset permanent employee entitlements under the award itself.
All right, and look, the final thing we wanted to touch upon was clause 12.3 under employee notification. This is the second clause, of course, which FCB have amended following the Workpac and Rossato decision, and it states that you must notify us or an appointed representative of your inability, and you've added, or unwillingness to attend work or commence work on time as soon as possible. A quick explanation of that amendment, Nick?
Yeah, it's another abundant caution one, Charles, where we thought inability really was probably limited to things like, someone's unwell or has got some sort of caring responsibilities, and probably didn't give us, it didn't really support this stronger idea that it's about an option to not accept work or to reject work. So we've got that, we've added unwillingness to, again, support that overall package.
Yeah, so it's really, I guess, respecting that it's the initiative of the employee as much as it is the initiative of the employer, which again goes back to the principles of Workpac and Rossato.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
So look, two amendments to the template, which we would invite you to consider, 4.1 and 12.3, but also some very important elements otherwise around the use of this template. So use FCB if you need further clarity, Nick, around this. No doubt the team who handle the workforce info line are I guess, abreast of these changes and can provide further details. May our work be risk-free work, Nick. Thank you to you and FCB for making these changes. And yes, no doubt there'll be further updates into the future when we get a legislative change. But until then, we love your work and stay good. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Thank you all.
Thanks, Danny.